Ever wished you could just, get inside the head of a great artist, especially during a really key moment?
Well, that's exactly what we're aiming for today.
We're doing a deep dive into Vincent van Gogh's letters.
Specifically, a collection written mostly to his brother Theo. And these aren't just casual notes. I mean, they cover this incredibly pivotal time for him.
Right, roughly February 1888 through early 1889,
Exactly, when he first moves down to Arles in Provence.
which became such a huge place for his art, didn't it? The light, the subjects, but also a time of, well, intense personal struggle.
hmm And the source material we're using, this pasted text, it's just packed with his thoughts, his personal observations.
You get everything, his ideas on art, what he thought of other artists, Gauguin, Bernard, Seurat.
And really candid stuff, too. His health, money worries, just what life was like day to day in Arles.
So our mission today is to dig into these letters and pull out the key insights. We want to understand his artistic process better,
How he saw his relationships with other painters.
how his theories were developing, especially about color and portraits, which were becoming so central.
And importantly, how he was actually doing personally during this incredibly creative but also really turbulent year.
Yeah, we're looking for those aha moments, the things that really light up his art and his thinking. Okay, so let's jump in.
Well, right off the bat, his arrival in Arles in February 88, it wasn't quite what he expected.
No.
He found snow in Provence.
Wow. Okay.
And what's fascinating is he immediately compares the snowy scenes to Japanese winter landscapes.
Even with almond trees already blooming.
Exactly. It shows the connection to Japanese art was already so strong in his mind, shaping how he even saw the French landscape.
That's such a striking image, isn't it? Snow in Japan and the south of France. And what about the local architecture? I know he reacted to St. Trophium.
He did. He found the portico magnificent but also brutal. That was his word.
Brutal.
Yeah, and even like a Chinese nightmare. It's a really strong, almost jarring reaction to this famous Romanesque building.
Definitely not a typical tourist response. He also mentions the local people, right? The Zouaves, the Arlésiens.
They become part of the local color he's observing, subjects he'd later paint.
Now, shifting gears a bit, he was also thinking about the bigger art world, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He even comments on, like, the death of Kaiser Wilhelm.
The German emperor. What did that have to do with anything?
Well, he was wondering about the ripple effects, on France, on the art trade, even potential changes to import duties for art going to America.
Huh. That shows a surprising awareness of the sort of economic side of things.
Definitely. And that ties into his ideas about artists needing more financial stability.
Ah, yes, the Artists Association idea.
Exactly. He proposed that the big names, the established Impressionists, Degas, Monet, Renoir, Sisley, Pissarro.
The ones actually selling well by then.
Right. He thought they should lead the way by contributing their works. And here's the really interesting bit.
Go on.
He suggested their paintings should become general property of the association.
General property,
Yeah.
like shared ownership.
Pretty much. It's this idea of collective support, a really social dimension to his thinking. He felt it would solidify their standing and also stop criticism from younger artists.
Wow, that's quite radical for the time, isn't it? A sort of artists' co-op.
It really is.
Yeah.
Very forward-thinking. And he wasn't just theorizing. He was actively pushing Theo, his
Yeah.
brother.
Who's an art dealer?
Right. Pushing him to work with Tersteeg, another dealer, to get credit from their gallery, Bussaud and Valadon, specifically to buy Impressionist works.
Seeing it as a practical step towards making this association viable.
Exactly. He was trying to make it happen.
Okay, so alongside these big ideas, what about his actual painting? He arrived in Arles. The landscape must have hit him hard.
It did. That period right after he arrives was incredibly productive. He talks about working intensely on the orchards in bloom.
Ah, the famous ones, apricot trees, plum trees.
Yes. He emphasizes how many canvases he's going through, how much
Wow.
paint he's using. You feel this burst of energy trying to capture that spring bloom.
And he wasn't just focused on the daytime, right? He mentions the night sky.
Oh, yeah. He expresses this strong desire, this need almost, to paint a starry night.
With cypresses, maybe? Or over a wheat field?
Exactly. He was clearly captivated by the nights in Arles, wanted to capture that intensity, that emotion. It wasn't just about observation.
It feels like he's reaching for something deeper there.
I think so.
Uh-huh.
And then, after the trees finished flowering, well, painting gets expensive.
The paint, the canvases.
Right. So he starts experimenting more with reed pen drawings.
And he connects that to Japanese art again.
Explicitly. He sees it as a related technique, It shows him adapting, being resourceful, but still pushing his art forward.
And then comes the move to the Yellow House.
Place Lamartine, which becomes so iconic.
But for him, at the time, it wasn't just a place to live, was it? It was key to that artist's community dream.
Absolutely. He starts planning the furnishings almost immediately. It's a concrete step towards making that dream real.
Now, artistically, he wasn't just thinking landscape. He had big ambitions for figure painting, too.
Huge ambitions. He actually says he wants to achieve for figure painting what Monet had done for landscape.
Wow. So, taking on the sort of hierarchy of genres.
Precisely. And elevating figure painting through color. He even predicts that a colorist, the like of which has never yet been seen, is going to emerge. He's aiming high.
You can feel that drive. And the Sower paintings start around then.
Yes, heavily inspired by Millet, the painter of peasant life.
Who he admired hugely.
Immensely. But Van Gogh wanted to do a large-scale color version. He saw the Sower figure as a symbol of something eternal.
Bringing that subject into his vibrant, modern palette.
Exactly. He also finds a great model in a Zouave soldier.
One of those French North African troops.
Yeah, capturing that specific local character. And later, he turns to the wheat fields, the haystacks.
Classic Provençal scenes.
But he specifically contrasts his approach to Cézanne's, emphasizing what he calls the harsh side of Provence. He's finding his own voice, his own take on the landscape.
Not just imitating. And there's that still life, too, the one with the coffee pots.
Ah, yes, the blue and yellow one. He felt that was a real step forward for him. Maybe in how he handled those strong color contrasts, the composition.
And he's constantly observing the light, the changing colors. He talks about those old gold, bronze, and copper tones in the landscape.
His descriptions are so vivid. You really sense his intense visual perception.
Amidst all this incredible artistic output, how was he actually doing, health-wise?
It's mixed, based on the letters. He does say he feels better physically in Arles. The air suits him. He even jokes about the effect of a single glass of cognac. But he also mentions his stomach being weak initially, so it suggests things weren't entirely stable.
And he touches on mental health, too, quite openly for the time.
Surprisingly openly. He reflects on hereditary neurosis, mental illness, and even mentions his sister Will in that context.
That's quite remarkable, that candor.
It is. And it seems linked to a decision to try and live healthier.
How so?
He talks about focusing on cold water, fresh air, simple food, getting enough sleep, and consciously avoiding, as he puts it, womanizing.
So a pragmatic effort to manage his well-being to support the work.
It looks that way. He reflects on finding a kind of balance where the sheer intensity of the work reduces his need for other, maybe more disruptive, passions or diversions.
Art as both the driving force and maybe a kind of anchor.
Perhaps. He's also worried about Theo's health, though. Notices his brother seems lethargic, suggest doctors.
It shows that strong bond, the mutual care between them.
Definitely. And interestingly, he sometimes views his own down periods, his melancholy, not just as bad things, but maybe as signs of recovery. A strange perspective.
That is an unusual take. He also talks a lot about money, or the lack of it.
Constantly. The cost of art versus just the cost of living. It's a recurring, painful theme.
He really hopes his pictures will eventually be worth something, right? To cover his debts to Theo, and more.
There's a real yearning for the art to have tangible value, to justify the expense and sacrifice. He even offers to just do drawings if Theo's really strapped for cash.
Showing consideration even amidst his own needs. And he painted that mousme.
Yes. The young girl, sort of a mix of Japanese and Provençal influences in his mind. And the Zouave portrait again. Diverse subjects.
He also reflects on getting older, needing his health for the work.
Yeah, a sense of time and the need to stay productive. But there are moments where he feels his mental exhaustion is actually lifting.
A positive shift.
Seems like it. He mentions being able to be alone without getting bored, suggesting maybe a greater inner peace, finding fulfillment in the work itself.
That's hopeful.
But then there's that powerful metaphor he uses. The artist as a cab horse.
Oh, right. Longing for a meadow of real life.
It just perfectly captures that tension, doesn't it? Between the demands of art and the simple human desire for, well, normality.
It really does. He also had this interesting interpretation of Corot's last dream.
Seeing it as foreshadowing impressionism shows his grasp of art history.
And despite all the struggles, he holds on to this belief in an art of the future.
Yeah, something so lovely and so young. It's this thread of optimism, of faith in art itself, that seems to keep him going.
Now, let's talk about that artist's community idea more. It was a huge deal for him in Arles.
A massive driving force. And interestingly, he was influenced by reading about Wagner.
The composer.
Yes, Wagner's ideas about total art, communal art. Van Gogh saw parallels for painters working together, collaborating closely.
And Gauguin was central to this plan, wasn't he?
Absolutely central. His letters are full of excitement about Gauguin potentially joining him. He sees all the benefits, artistic collaboration, sharing costs.
You can feel the anticipation building.
Definitely. And it directly impacts his work on the Yellow House. He specifically describes paintings he's doing as decorations for it.
The sunflowers, obvious.
The sunflowers, yes. And detailed plans for color schemes in the rooms. He wants to create this inspiring environment for them both.
It shows his decorative sense, too. He also had thoughts on Degas, didn't he? Something about nudes.
Yeah, quite complex thoughts. He links Degas's way of painting nudes to Degas' own life choices, his apparent decision to prioritize art over relationships. Van Gogh is really thinking about the connection between an artist's life and their work.
And he paints that portrait of Eugene Bach.
The Belgian painter, yes, calls it a portrait of an artist friend who dreams great dreams, set against a starry sky.
Again, aiming for more than just a likeness, capturing the inner life.
Exactly. And his friendship with Bach, their talks about art, it highlights how much he craved that connection, that community.
So when Gauguin finally arrives,
The letters just burst with joy. He has such incredibly high hopes for this partnership. He sees it as like a pivotal moment.
but it wasn't all smooth sailing, right? They argue.
Intensely. The letters mention big debates, especially about Delacroix.
Who Van Gogh adored for his color.
Right, and Rembrandt, the Dutch master. They had very different takes. This friction, while difficult, probably pushed both of them artistically.
And Van Gogh really wanted Gauguin's self-portrait, the
Yeah.
one as Jean Valjean.
He did. Which shows, despite the arguments, a real appreciation for Gauguin's power as an artist.
Even though their collaboration eventually collapsed, that dream of the studio as a refuge persisted for a while.
It did. He initially saw Gauguin as the head of it, the leader, and his descriptions of his own bedroom decor in the Yellow House.
The famous painting of the bedroom.
Yes. He describes wanting simplicity, using color to create restfulness, calmness. It shows his practical thinking about this shared space.
Let's dig into his artistic theories a bit more, the color especially.
It's evolving rapidly during this period. He moves towards what he calls a more arbitrary use of color.
Arbitrary, meaning what exactly? Not realistic.
Exactly. Less about just copying the colors he saw, and more about using color expressively to convey emotion, mood, ideas. This is heavily influenced by Delacroix, who he admired so much.
So a big step towards modern expressionism, really.
A huge step. And his admiration for Millet, we mentioned it before, but it's constant. He wants to build on Millet's depiction of peasant life, but bring it into his world of color.
What about the Dutch masters, his own heritage?
He had a nuanced view. He acknowledged their skill, their taste and feeling for composition, as he put it. But he felt most lacked imagination or fantasy. Except, crucially, for Rembrandt.
Rembrandt was different.
Totally different in Van Gogh's eyes. He saw a profound depth there, especially in his religious works, his angels, something metaphysical.
And Delacroix remained a hero.
Absolutely. For his color, his emotional power, his depictions of Christ, Delacroix was a key touchstone for expressive painting.
He also gets really interested in Monticelli around this time.
Yes, Adolphe Monticelli, a painter known for thick paint, rich colors. Van Gogh felt he was continuing in the footsteps of this man.
Seeing a connection in that bold use of paint and color.
Exactly. Another artist pushing boundaries. And then there's Japan.
Always Japan.
It's a constant thread. He sees Japanese art as holding wisdom, a connection to nature, philosophy. He admires its clarity, its simplicity. It influences everything, composition, line, his whole outlook.
He even reads Tolstoy.
Yeah. Interested in Tolstoy's ideas about religion, about finding solace within. It shows his mind was ranging beyond just painting techniques.
And ultimately, in portraiture, his goal was
To capture the mind, the soul of the model, to go way beyond just the surface. He wanted that deep human connection in his portraits.
which requires incredible empathy. Now, through all this intense creation, the money problems were always there.
Always. It's a constant drumbeat in the letters. The need for funds to buy supplies, his total reliance on Theo's support.
He uses that phrase, doesn't he? Painting as an expensive mistress.
He does. It really captures the relentless financial drain. But he also holds on to this practical idea that the canvases are worth money. It's a motivation, a justification for the work.
He hopes they'll eventually pay off, literally.
Yeah, cover his expenses and then some. It's this underlying hope in the future value of his art. And like we said, he's practical enough to offer to do drawings if money's tight and tries to furnish the Yellow House cheaply.
Okay, then comes the crisis. December 1888, the ear incident. How did the letters handle that?
Yes.
Well, the tone shifts dramatically, as you'd expect. His own account of the ear incident, it's strikingly understated.
How so?
He calls it a perfectly ordinary attack of artistic temperament, which feels like maybe denial or just minimizing the trauma.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly downplayed. But he does recover physically, somewhat, and gets back to work.
He does. He talks about his recovery and immediately starts painting again. Focuses on the portrait of Madame Roulin, La Berceuse.
Art as a lifeline again.
Seems like it. A way to find stability. There's also this complex bit about a canvas he owes Gauguin.
He wants to return it.
She says he'll return what is yours, but he also wants to paint two identical copies for himself first. It's like this mix of wanting to settle things, but also asserting his own claim.
Complicated. And the dream of the artist's colony.
That's clearly dashed. He talks about needing to work calmly now, focus on his health. It's a big shift from that earlier communal ambition, but he decides to keep the Yellow House.
Why?
For his own mental health, he says.
Yeah.
He needs that space, that home base.
And he starts talking more about mental illness itself.
Yeah, based on conversations he's having with other people in Aries. He seems to be developing a clearer understanding, maybe acceptance, of his own condition. And he keeps painting. He mentions specific works he thinks are good enough to be put on stretchers.
Still maintaining his standards.
Yes, but there are moments of real despair. He even mentions thinking about joining the Foreign Legion.
Wow. As a complete escape.
Seems like it. A drastic measure. He also talks about his studio getting damp and damaged while he was ill, a sort of physical symbol of things falling apart.
And he feels the world just doesn't care about painting.
He mentions that societal indifference. It must have added to the isolation. But then Signac visits.
Paul Signac, the neo-impressionist.
Right. And that visit seems to have been a real source of support, a connection back to the art world.
Which leads him towards considering the asylum.
Yes, Saroni. He starts thinking about it as a precaution, a place to recover. He begins to accept madness as a disease like any other.
That's a significant step towards self-care in a way.
It is. And he mentions his coping mechanism, simple things. Wine, bread, cheese, tobacco, referencing Dickens. Little comforts. But the overall feeling in these later letters is one of exhaustion, disorientation after the crisis.
It's an incredibly intense journey condensed into about a year.
It really is. So wrapping up this deep dive, what we see is this period of just ferocious dedication to art, right alongside profound personal turmoil.
The letters give us this incredible window into his evolving ideas, the influence of artists like Rembrandt, Delacroix, Millet.
His complex relationships, especially with Gauguin, the dream and collapse of the artist community.
And the constant struggles, health, money, finding his place.
For me, the real aha moments are seeing that incredibly innovative, expressive use of color developing.
Yeah, using color for emotion, not just description.
Exactly. And his deep thinking about the artists who came before him, plus that ambition for community and just his raw honesty about art and life.
And for you, the listener, hopefully you felt like you got that direct line into the mind of this passionate, visionary artist.
He's wrestling with things we all grapple with, creativity, connection, the struggles of being human. His letters offer so much insight into the artistic process, but also just into life.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a final thought to leave you with.
Consider the unique power of letters, of personal correspondence like this. How it can just open up the inner world of someone from the past.
Yeah, giving us perspectives on history, on art that you just don't get anywhere else. It makes you wonder.
What other artists, what other historical figures might have left behind letters that offer similar insights?
Maybe this dive inspires you to explore Van Gogh even more, or perhaps seek out the correspondence of other fascinating people. There's often so much more to discover in their own words.